Nice to see so many of you. Welcome to the Poetry Project. Folks are still coming in. My name is Mira Narsaños. I'm the program director here, and I'm extremely excited tonight to welcome Rainer Diana Hamilton and Bianca Rae Messenger. Welcome you both to the Poetry Project. Yes. I don't have many announcements before we begin, other than this is the second to last reading before the season ends, and it's a gift to end it with you both. Next week, we do have an event celebrating Lola the Interpreter by Lynn Hajinian, and that will be officially our last event of the season before we take a break and see you all on January 1st for a marathon, which is going to be amazing. So please come back next week if you're around. And other than that, there are books for sale. Lilacs that came out, I think, a couple of months, like last month or this month, very recently. This month. And Bianca's book also, Pink and Green, on the table over there. Grab a copy. They're both really beautiful. Okay, so we will begin with Bianca. I will introduce Bianca. Then Kay, my colleague, is going to introduce Rainer. And yeah, so I will now begin. Okay. I should have printed this intro. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. Pleasure is a Miracle is an exciting book. Literally exciting. Arousing in its ability to activate the mind. I read it feeling caffeinated and giddy, wanting more of Bianca's writing. I'm surprised at every turn, not by an unexpected phrasing or twist of expression, but because the matrix of language itself feels slightly beside itself, displaced from the grid that guarantees its stability and meaning. I understand what I'm reading, of course, but that's not really the point. The grip of knowledge on its object feels looser and thinking when divorced from a goal begins to exert traction. Language becomes attractive, words pulling letters from other words, energetically reorganizing on the page our experience of both time and space. But Pleasure is a Miracle isn't about breaking free from the social and temporal enclosures containing the body. Perhaps the opposite. It intensifies those bounds, revealing the story of our containers, like a room in Monterey. Quote, I think of that room in Monterey. I'm in the room in Monterey and having been fucking in the hotel Monterey and thinking of you always in that room in Monterey. End of quote. Having been fucking names an action ongoing prior to a reference point in time. Suffering from chronophobia, our narrator keeps that before active. Quote, so that memory looks what it feels, a formation without regret. Quote, to get to a point where it is not returning, but recombining, end of quote. Yesterday, in a reading group I sometimes attend, and that Bianca is also a part of, someone raised a question about critique and belief, whether the compulsory need to expose the ideology can ultimately undermine it, or whether it persists even after its violence has been exposed. I don't know if Bianca's book can answer this question, but I find that the way that she uses narrative to intensify and reorganize our enclosures invigorating. It's like we're both inside and outside our own consciousness, alienated and deeply in love. Miracles are not divine gifts descending from above. They're insurrectionary, the same way that pussies are luminous. Quote, they're like these beams of light that come between legs, end of quote. And that space on the page can be miraculous. Please join me in welcoming Bianca Rae Messenger.
Thank you so much, Marin, for that incredible introduction, and also calling out my not being at reading group yesterday. But I was on the train. This is such a wonderful event for so many reasons, and I'm just so pleased. Thank you to the project. Thank you to Marin. Thank you, Rainer, who will read with me, and everyone who works at the project. I'm going to read a bit from the book. And then I'm gonna move around a little bit. I'm also gonna read from, you're gonna hear the response before you hear the address. Because I have poems that are also, might appear in Rainer's book. So let's begin. Ravishing of a field. A spiral is the shape of a progression of circles. Thus, myopia may serve to dispel the pains of chronophobia. Lynn Hegenian. And then in that gray field, some smallness becomes focus, becomes two men in yellow vests. It resembles little, but feels this conflagration, because a balance is created, but not in representation. So that memory looks like what it feels, not that exact signaling, but some formation without regret, to get to a point where it is not returning, but recombining, which is what it is, not a progression. Maybe being myopic is being what the shape of a lamp feels like, or the timber of a sunset, or the crease in a back as you slide your arm across it, time so that it includes. Wondering how a U connects onwards, needing to touch a fountain in Paris and never having been, and needing it to happen quickly. But you were always more wary than me, except by what was necessary, slow and profound as it makes an echo. This space being so massive from the mountains on every side, afraid, so smoking, so much space to be filled, being what they say is value in an idea, a last visit before it's just getting out with itself, visit before she's gone, isn't it? I will wake up there, want I. Then looking at their space, dotted, crossed like, more that she wanted me being a habit of it, in its neighbor, and in the time of her thinking it, of a roundabout, of wanting to come, needing it actually, and for once being able to get that across, coming and the marking she makes on your leg of its making. What? At that point, time felt small, a step lighter as she looks to the source of its movement, which we call beginning. Then the mail comes as a recording. Oh, fits of intimacy, each red strand trapped in an orange tube. And it wasn't to do with her. Instead, they call it gratification. Fearing control, but wanting it deeply and unattachable simultaneously, which surprised me, looming against progress. Parallel bars. Because there is no new way. Diegetic sound, non-diegetic sound, blood having come from the floorboards, her fists against it, then steam from a mound and broken bread, then diegetic sound, non-diegetic sound, the box slightly open in video and slightly fading away into itself, then all at once, everything combining. Within it, we, in our putting together projects within movement and not outside, slightly becoming and then its opposite, diegetic sound, non-diegetic. Back there, we make ourselves stop moving, following circles instead of their opposites, coming out in floor and again large keyholes or adjustments, losing sight of desire and then returning too fast, small openings or man workers like hissing or bubbles. The bars at the entrance to an open box with the lights in the background. We, in crossing, we realize we alone can glimpse their smile. That night where it's very windy, the building swaying between the streets, fantasy becoming an elementary fabrication with an elementary definition of price. the fabrication under whose non-diegetic constraint it is not exclusively maintained. We begin from the diegetic perspective of objects in order to examine the struggle of the feelings against their inadequate form. A street which is a storm, but taken from the view of the wind outside, what we call pleasure cannot be treated as one good among others. It is only because it is related as a very peculiar object, as you say, a body, in that the enjoyment of said object can be considered, not withholding, as very soft rain, and where the shapes between buildings are, and where I find you in them, and me below the rocks where the rats are under them again, but instead to write it on the big screen, because it's where I was in the city, and being far from our favorite saints. Upon realizing wonder doesn't take an object, this one being directed at you, in the Gospel according to Matthew, he starts again, watching our concerns, having found it where you were and where the party starts, going somewhere we need, it being a smell thing, and going back tomorrow at it with the feeling of living, of what's needed somewhere else. He's known it from a decade of collecting frames, only he didn't force it into feeling, or didn't try to. That instinct comes back accidentally. Yeah, thanks to things being polyvocal when they don't know what else they are. He asked what she's reading. She's listening to the fish jump. I was able to say what tools I used in my process, and it makes me want to get caught, but I never do. I will tell you of the heavens, not of meditation or giving credit, where the unrespected machines go. Two boys of the same vine, only one comes to the public, and one goes the other way, saying, it's the will of the Father, it being a small thing, and saying to let it take its course like an anecdote, then taking a second to focus on his glasses and his stupid top body, unable to see an escape, or the prefect either. She was too busy to be unworked, having given up on coming, and instead asks what it sounds like to be this close to God. Looking at portions of the street instead, its main charm being a change in heart rate when the music builds. And so this is a, I guess is this a lilac then? Does this count as a lilac? So this is a response to Rainer's response to Rousseau's response to D'Alembert, because we're all 18th centuryists here. The flecks of simple cruelty come in 4 separate pieces, but the joints of the Narcissus come in around the same time. Zhukovsky and Rousseau share a fondness for flowers, but not for fruit. Back to the number 6, which is to mean a man watches a man catching fish, and another one eating it, being there with a woman, because they still keep lead in the glass alongside the rotation. If that part is the most delicious, then it will taste that way, the way grapes work. And I ask her for the word that makes things slower. Then she brings us the big grove of experiences. And I tell you that the hill was made on purpose for the city. It's a state that brings back a project I'd abandoned. 4 or 5 years I tasted habitually those internal delights which I owe to my persecutors. Without them, I never would have found or known the treasures. That goats ferment their own milk, that I've started that too, but haven't told you. So the other line or section is the one with the characters, which are distinct from the lips in a muffled old garden, as the king of the pirates writes that every revolution starts in a church or the place of one, because they do not have windows that lead to what lies outside. So maybe that was what I was trying to tell you, me not having a system for it. A novel that was pure nerves, without its aromatic sense, even though he's covered up the grains in hyssop, so I'm touched by a memory which I'm barely attached to. Are you more charmed than surprised? But don't worry about not being able to smell the big cruciferous glands. Even the great botanists miss them and turn around in unequal forms. Knowing what I think about the novels of women, let's stay away from the orchids. Courting our spirit of the heart, and trying so hard to show you where it is. That we are here, where I am, in the observatory. Oh, look, there's my husband, giving hip to the pure sky, and lost, sent to offer that with the flies. I have only received the natural aspect, around, and no dreaming tone since we've started this. But maybe that's because we haven't finished. It's a classic misunderstanding. I have myself had nothing, but I feel I have. Big trouble in little Poland. We wanted the stuff in front to move behind. In any case, I, had a gift as long as it's provisional. I told them that your heart led us to Princeton's place, and he was lost to it, I having the scent of a fly do. Well, look at her, on the mountains, with that cast of numbers extra. So we are aboard, keeping secret guile in the social life of saints. You do like it when I complain, and sometimes it actually does help to lie about it. And how stupid that of all the supernatural dawns I could have received, I ended up with yours. To experience can be added all the detail you could ever want, but it won't help us find the limit. Being none of these things, Mr. Pynchon, does it meanwhile suffice wanting something else? You mean, could you acquiesce a stout, almost inseparable attachment to smell? Would you rather die? Let's scatter it and supplement experience, please. Yes to completion through animal spirits. No to retaining your past obsession with sight. Who cares how strong your powers of distinction are? And so I'm going to read one more poem before moving to a novella. And so this is actually coming out in the project, I guess, in the newsletter as a response to an interview question. So what can the libertine and the nun teach each other? They remember distance. They don't realize how to solve the problem till later, and being distressed, but not the way you think. It's our hard bargain for reanimating our friendship, going up and down the apartment depending on who's on the floor, it being embedded in the mountain. Everyone comes up to me. Each floor opens up, and it's these guys. So we're both embedded, but not to escape pleasure. The nun says, I'm in the bottom floor of the house, and they keep coming at me. I have a penis in the dream, or something like it. And the guys are coming into the house, no matter how high I go. When they go up, the ceilings fall apart. All these guys and a pile of them. There's the king of them, and he says, there's only one way to win. At first, I think it's taking it from him, seemingly easier, or at least customary, in it not taking the nun out of themselves. Then we realize he means, no, you have to top me with the penis-like thing. Then the field goes tan, and I collapse. Well, green. He, the libertine, smells wet. Tan, the grass is outside, and blue sky. And she, the big she, recognizes us in the outline of their hot face at night, and smelling and not stopping. All right, so this is from a forthcoming novella called Hypotheca, or The True Concord of Well-Tuned Souls. And it's about the tuning of souls, basically. That's all you need to know. Daniela keeps a memo from John Jack next her bed with the St. Christopher medallion nested in it. The insects more profligate, being bathed in them, having gotten to where we are not necessarily by choice, but there is an attuning which comes to pass, for instance, not knowing what going from a feeling of governance to something else feels like, committing sex fraud. You were looking for a form of working that makes itself happen, not as a reflection of power, then doing that, then waiting on what comes next. That gave it a sense of where your fatigue was, the lack of anyone getting their shit together, finding what's happening or going on in there as it corresponds to energy, having at that moment become an expression of anger, and then doing the anger to you necessarily as a sex thing. They said it was a buffer because it came from a long time ago. It didn't. Telling things in other degrees didn't get the message across in the way you wanted. We could say it like this: what comes to your mind, but as a part of it and not as something outside. Annette was awake. Good morning, students of the world. Fuck, says Daniela. She couldn't tell. John Jack's hand goes up and down the line of her, meaning he feels inclined to respond. Her not being where she was normally, being unable to feel this place, or it having to be filled with other places first. Thinking, as it came back again, of fucking, in the sense where each other line ran parallel to the other again, until some large or small and great force swerved through her. There was a small portion of the rotunda not filled with roses, and she had been sitting, not looking at John Jack, or not having to, knowing that a progression would occur, knowing blood had something to do with nerves, and with the roses. In a more general meaning, but trying not to get too ahead of it, she walked out into a kind of smoky dust, punctuated by lines of pink which surrounded the garden. All that can be seen beyond the circular wall, meaning above it. It gave the idea of there being an outside. Or they, the two of them, wall and outside, had been there from when they could not remember. This time, Daniela responds to Joe. The nerves arrive only after the sun. There is sun here, or something that's like it, but the nerves cannot withstand it. I feel them cut apart. The process of putting them back, or restoring them, as you say, would take weeks, or what I think of as weeks. I have to open myself like a cherry, etc. It's a lot of work, saying prayers before and after. I have to imagine this place to be completely empty. No you. Otherwise it, my desire, makes putting them back impossible. John Jack knows she shouldn't say anything, but not because of listening, but because of the pressure around the roses, sucking them in. But she would say making Daniela come is a lot like breathing. She can't think about it for too long, or can't externalize it, but we shouldn't be calling it thinking because it's something else. By the roses, on the curve of the coast over the edge of it, had meant not a jutting out, but giving the feeling of being drawn out, while still having the beach that it did in front. The roses too have a curve, when they call for us, as if they follow our placement, as it were, on the beach. But I only realized this afterwards. The shifting would come, see? That's why I dig myself in deeper and deeper. A certain je ne sais quoi, But one that attracts, which makes the entire system of blood tides possible. Then the pink sky shifts some of them, its folds, and deposits us back into the garden, abruptly, as in having to hold on to its limits. The walls of the garden are curved, though still obviously inimical, and do not produce an end, or at least I can't see any. Its main characteristic is its unattainability. That's the thing about curvature, reaching without culminating at any specific point. Its poles attaching only as a cutout or a distillation of the main structure, what it feels like to be a bridge, the desire to move under oneself, yet being trapped within the confines of the garden. You remember more being on its outside, the more you remain within the garden, outside the texture of the water on the far side, mixed with its coming back towards you, and the coupling of these. She liked to maintain the fantasy of the body as a whole, liked but also forced, liking being more a form of resemblance than any actual interest. She had no idea where actual interests came from or looked like. The beds of roses were narrow, which felt strange given how far out the posts of the garden were. And it had come back to her now, her body. It was somehow always her fucking problem. She holds the arm out now, letting each red spurt fall softly in the narrow beds, first hitting the pedestal, then making its way down to the axle. The roots glisten and hum slightly, a gentle whirl filling the garden. She whispers sardonically at the roses, "What does it feel like to be a bridge?" Who, while not being able to respond in kind, still gave the sense that they were, like everything here, at times. C'est dans cette chanson que je te trouve. Smelling the mixture of spit and cum on Joe's stomach gave us ideas, contractions, presentations. Having found an ambiguation that allowed the blood to move back upwards, John Jack shuffles into a semi-upright position, a layer of field, a miracle of design, a simple selection, building of the grade, one complex next to another, allowing finer fibers to create for her the impact of the room around, where she was, having been forgotten. Between being and the other one, putting the headset down on the desk. She thinks back to when Daniela and her had first met. Despite the difficulty in imagining it, its evolution was perfectly feasible. Met being the odd world, as even 5 feet of proximity pulls you into the first crust, layer of the telemapping. In our sense of being full, the mapping never feels random. It not being a dormant even, it instead being something closer to a sense of the groundwork, not solitary movement. The man up a few seats from us cleared his throat, there being a sense of it still there. She remembered her dick and her water-filled chamber like a kind of imagining. Them walking down the edge of the station. This was before we had to flee to Bone. Heloise remembers the first time having an element of surprise, more because of her own inability to anticipate her own demands, and the telemap couldn't help her with that, not in the way she wanted. Thank you for your preference, Annette says to her. I always loved that one. They realize the painting next to the bed features 2 girls in thin layers of acrylic paint, bright, lost lines. It's pretty lesbian, don't you think? Annette stays silent. Them being in a yellow bed, holding the pillow while the other spoons her. Outside, the Lancers would be on the waves later, with the cross on the rocks on the other side of the small bay. It got up to 45 by the time the sun peeked over the cliffs. Dee was suffering in the bed next to A, waking up from her and the pink starting to pool in her leg again, having to come and then squeegee it off the floor. That's not a pillow, Dee. Oh, it's a saxophone. And anyways, they're not in bed because the blonde one has a guitar. Oh. Dee was thinking of John Jack inside of her again to distract herself from A. Dee was starting to lose interest in the way A talked. A keeps going. It doesn't work like that. The regulator, the images must be processed through the chamber before we can know them. You can't just throw yourself at them. Why not? Have you ever read the rules of engagement? Daniela had forgotten how staid her references were at times through the process of falling in love. That he should do his tasks. Dear Annette, the nub in Bone is glub. The working hard sure is fun. So I did not dilemma when I heard it. I heard him in the kitchen outside first. The one in the sun. There's a dog. You're there too, but as a telemap. So he's speaking over that too. Whatever thought lands on this, and she pulls the car out ahead then anyways, there being nothing left to him. The spy after putting him on the map, totally. No space left anyways. She went back to the bench and being trapped there wasn't in the habit of having guests, but had imagined the castle, though burned, is the same shape. And it's not like anyone's keeping anything from you because we're not trapped in the confessional mode. And isn't it amazing how little can actually be happening at one time? Anyways, this one has a core, and it's a thrill going to a city that has flowers mixed in with their sleet. So there's a thrill, and I'm writing to you. I asked in the last letter when it was you heard the question reiterated, then read it into the telemap again. So it has to be in there somewhere. I feel there to be a kind of need for containment, but it was wrong as usual. And learning doesn't come like that anyways. One after the other. A tornado comes in the middle of the garden to take them away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Fabulous. I'm Kay Gabriel. It's my pleasure to introduce Rainer Diana Hamilton. Dear Rainer, I tremble with enthusiasm every time I talk about your writing, so much so that I might be mistaken for a religious devotee or an influencer in your pay. or an unrequited lover doing my best to sublimate my attachment to you into a more refined and shareable appreciation of your work. But I'm none of those things. I'm a fan and an epistolary hanger-on. I'm a long-time listener, and I love to call in. And now I get to do one of my favorite possible activities, which is revel in the permission, the social permission from all of you of the moment to talk about your work. Rainer, imagine the effect you had on me before we knew each other when I was reading for the first time with slack-jawed wonderment the poem essays of God Was Right. With each endeavor in your book, I felt as if you solved a problem I hadn't even known I labored under. Here, I handled evidence that poetry could persuade with as much force and intention as it charmed the senses, could introduce ideas with more acuity, but then again revise itself with more humility than professional criticism, could bristle with insight and relate the kind of narrative that either puts that insight into practice or undercuts it with a useful but never mean-spirited irony, could do all of these things in the tone of a friend taking you on a walk or writing you letters to prompt your ideas, rather than the posture of a grad student getting professional for a job that more or less no longer exists. Rainer, you sit the reader in that wonderful, challenging spot from which we make and then revise our own decisions, in an activity of acting together that far outlasts the single moment of reading. And you encourage us to make those decisions, to commit to something, with the grace of writing into being an open-ended permission for us not to be right, to not be complete, to not know, to not pass our exams, to not even be good at writing, and nonetheless to try because the stakes are high and real. We're not right, God is. Or, God is, so we don't have to be. Or imagine the other rich permission you doled out to write about dreams, like you do in the first half of The Awful Truth, the part titled Write in Your Sleep. If that's an imperative, it kicked me in the teeth. You didn't know me, but you offered me permission, an orgy of permission. It's the dream itself that permits you to write it, you say. Dreams are more confident than poets. They don't wait to win prizes from the Poetry Society of America. And later you say that Freud may not prove that dreaming is writing, your succulent thesis, but you can't deny that the dreams take up space on the page, indicating that with enough sleep, you'll have a book-length manuscript. So that's how you and Bernadette Mayer DP'd me into writing not just one, but 2 books out of dreams. And I am extra grateful to be a part of elaborating this project with you. And now, in Lilacs, you've done it again. In a book that attacks the senses as a rich philosophical problem, a submerged history of class antagonism, and another tempting invitation to anybody else to co-create meaning out of stimuli. You begin with Marx and Keats and your own loss of smell, as if inverting Proust's leap into modernism from sensation. You move backwards from loss of sensation to memory to attempt to produce sensation, and failing at that, you engage everyone in, what did I write here? Sorry, I was scribbling, in an inquiry on taste. I can't get over how generous this book is. At every turn, it throws a hand to the reader like, well, what can you do with that? Write back and tell me all about it. I think, Rainer, that this gesture, more so even than the playful spill of your syntax, the way your sentences interrupt themselves with deliciously enumerated possibility, is the signature move of your writing, so much so that in inviting you to this podium, I may as well bring up the entire room, past and future, as chorus, interlocutor, lover, correspondent, but I'll let you make that decision and ask everyone here to join me in welcoming Rainer Diana Hamilton to the Poetry Project.
Okay. Thank you, Kay. I hope it's true. I love you so much. I also love you, Bianca. I'm glad you're in the middle of this book. There is a lot of love to announce, but also real love for this tiny bear on the cover, which was painted by Anne Craven, who's here, whose work I love. And I want you to picture not me reading, but this bear. That's the speaker of the poem, okay? Senses, lilac. An index card among Robert Grenier's sentences, 1978, reads, lilacs, against it. As if it were a protest sign, it being, say, borders or dress codes, or lilacs some queers, or a sigh from a lilac phobe, hatred of the Syringa family gone so far they've lost their taste for olives. I can't say how the cardstock felt since I read this poem online, nor what lilacs might stand for, though I know that they have sensory experience themselves, and that by some theories, this could result in their creation of a nostalgic art form, which I, like lilacs, am against. In Moscow, scientists put caterpillars of the large fruit tree tortrix, moths, on 3 fruit trees. They prefer their namesake, I guess, and 1 lilac to measure whether the trees on which the caterpillar grew would affect the number of sensilla, their sensory organs, the little hairs they use to feel and smell and taste. I thought the first time I read this meant they were hypothesizing that young caterpillars would be motivated to grow more sense organs if they experienced challenging sensory information. Mozart for babies, lilacs for tortrix larvae, but no. The number of sensilla merely stood in for the moth's ability to adapt to new environments. When the moths ate what they liked, apple, plum, currant trees, they grew the same, regardless of sex and phenotype, but reared on lilacs, not to their taste, the moths diverged, breaking off into generalists and specialists. When something is sensed, it repeats in the sensor's body, helping them remember it. The iconic, fleeting images, the echoic, the haptic, the proprioceptive. Sometimes the repetition lingers longer than it's supposed to. A sound keeps ringing, or appears before it should be sensible, anticipatory nipple pain. Or, as it shouldn't, a person sees a friend whom others insist is imaginary, like Big Bird. But sense memory is mostly timely. We have some obligation to notice and to remember what we noticed. Marx's grave is flanked by rows of blue lilacs. I'm not sensitive, and I'm mostly glad about it, to aesthetic data. I overlook plenty. This makes it possible to wait for a red light near foul-smelling trash, to enjoy spicy food, to be touched, to get some distance from the internal sensation the heart's racing or the foot hurts again, to be able to leave the body behind, to focus instead on something outside of it, as in the kind of guided meditation that asks you to notice the sound of the air conditioner or bees, or to pretend that the earth, however many layers of city sidewalk and about to open rat pits and underground parking garages stand in the way, reaches up, comes into contact with the soles of your feet, then promotes growth so that you briefly understand yourself as an especially fast-moving tree. I'm currently passing, for example, some bricks that are a kind of surprising orange. That's nice. I'm hearing a motorcycle. So the book after that is 5 poems, 1 for each of the senses, and then a longer poem at the end called Love Lilac. It's meant to synthesize them all. But I'm just going to read Taste Lilac, which is a letter to Mademoiselle B.R. Messenger on the preference for one thing over another. And you already heard her reply, so we're doing it in opposite order. Here's my sensual report. My smell returned again today, outside a bodega of bacon frying, and it's cruel that I could sense the burning pigs, but not the field we just shared of lilacs. The flowers lining the gravel to the gas station 1 mile away, 2 miles left in the tank, Boulder Syringas and those waiting in Olmsted's Highland Park after so many magnolias stole their show. Singing something from 1997 to 2002, the years connecting our conscious childhoods, when taste and friendship forms, and choruses. Where you told me, pulling onto Pinetum, you came late to lilacs. They didn't grow in your child mind. Before you offered me nasal alt text, neither the petals inserted into nostril alongside saline, lilac bump, nor the licked tree, the long discourse on the rights of children to gather near purple and white flowers, nor even turkey leg, singing of Eartha Kitt's wine, having helped me sense the whole purpose of my 8-hour train, telling me which bush was best, which sweet, which complicated. I wanted to cover the Lilac Festival with loving and hilarious specificity, but the cops had restricted the rights of teens to enter unaccompanied, punishment for their having stayed too late for last night's flowers, contorted by prejudice, that concave taste. So what was there to say but fuck them and thank you? Or let's switch. I can taste. I'll grow you a red in Sicilian salt, describe its effect on your cheeks, or let the soil opening up to let the whole Scarborough Fair through on the mild rinds of Asia Tau, consequence of the thistle rennet that acts on the raw sheep's milk in lieu of the more common enzymes found in the fourth stomach of nursing ruminants. And lambs, kids, cows, each produce their own digestive aid proper to their special milk, since the stomach is, after all, trying to curdle for the kid's own sake. The baby goat ferments its mom's milk with this inner mucosa to help digest all that dairy, a process believed to have been brought to Portugal by Iberian Jews at least 1,500 years before the Alhambra decree. Spinoza's family escaped to Amsterdam during the Inquisition, where young Baruch, censored by the Sephardim for monstrous deeds, saw his writing banned by Holland first and then the Catholic Church. And while he didn't theorize of cheese, and he didn't ground his ethics in aesthetic sense at all, he did advise leaving emotion out of taste-based persuasion. And if I want you to like this thistle cheese, which I really do, I should use reason, not my love, per George Eliot's translation of the Ethics. He who solely from emotion strives that others may love what he himself loves and that others may live according to his mind acts merely from impulse and is therefore odious, especially to those who have different tastes. Not just because this is coercive, but because love is less dependable than reason. It happens that those who love fluctuate in their feelings, and while they delight in praising the object they love, they fear to be believed. But he who strives to leave others by reason does not act impulsively, but humanly and benignantly, and is thoroughly stable in his sentiments. Meaning, we can share our taste, but within and only by way of reason, not by feeling. And the method's been known at least since 70 CE, when Columella, in his agricultural treatise, noted that milk should usually be curdled with rennet obtained from a lamb or a kid, though it could also be coagulated with the flower of the wild thistle or the seeds of the safflower, and equally well with the liquid which flows from a fig tree, if you make an incision in the bark while it's still green. And that, whichever rennet, one should use the smallest amount, the weight of a coin per pail. So if in office hours, Bianca, you asked your student to list the 5 most common adjectives used to describe sweetness, and she, confident, smiling, knowing posture is half of passing, said, "If you hope to arrange the exam to prevent my use of artificial intelligence, you must have an interest in my rational mind, which I wouldn't waste on the generation of such lists, as if I were a freelancer about to be fired. And I'd suggest you ask me instead about the ingredient that gives a product its form, distinct from those that merely season or disappear into an admixture." She wants to please Professor Messenger, and thereby me, who cares about taste memorization, i.e., what one should know about taste before tasting, salt before ducking one's head in the sea. Should we study the shelves at Kalustyan's to tell cinnamon from cinnamon? Who'd want to hear it? I omit my memories of eating to follow taste through this double, taste, not as measure, but as discernment of beauty or whatever else one looked for art to give before the introduction of aesthetic theory, which places me, I guess, in 18th century France with, say, Dominique Bouhours, je ne sais quoi's alleged inventor, that's not true, Montaigne said it first, who thought from salon culture that taste was a form of politeness, that you choose what to say at a party the same way you identify good art, by a certain I don't know what, that guarantees exclusivity, forms friendship, since it's better for a friend to have good taste in movies, parks, girlfriends, habits, tea, than to excel at criticism. We don't need to know a friend's take at credits close. We need them to pick out a good movie. Bianca, take the train to New York and meet me at Anthology. All tastes are acquired. I want to argue this against Burke, who brackets off what tastes good only after habit forms what isn't sweet, though he thinks sugar is just round salt, from what is naturally shared among men, so long as we can presume their tongues and toes and ears and nose and eyes function alike. A man frequently comes to prefer the taste of tobacco to that of sugar, and the flavor of vinegar to that of milk, but this makes no confusion in taste, whilst he is sensible that tobacco and vinegar are not sweet, and whilst he knows that habit alone has reconciled his palate to these alien pleasures. So I search the phrase and find it often ends, except the breasts. All tastes are acquired, except the breast. In the acquisition model, there's this Edenic taste, common to all before knowledge. We'd still be guzzling at tits, petting cats, admiring the moon, imitating the thrush's song, sniffing rose or whatever, without differentiation forever, if someone hadn't burned nightshade, coughed, spat, made the meme face of the woman coming around to the sour of kombucha, inhaled, coughed again, and then suddenly found themselves capable of focusing, such that, chain smoking near the tree of knowledge, they wrote the first review ranking the smoothness of various leaves. If you follow it, you're either trapped in the early Gaga theory of natural taste, born this way as peach eaters, or cast out into the unloved provinces where you know all things are teachable given a good enough school, hoping the right missionary found you in time to make you like sardines, sodomy, the films of Ernst Lubitsch, the friendships of a variety of mammals, spicy food, and long train rides. Instead of Rousseau, I write to you like Jean-Baptiste Dubois, for the license of addressing a friend, sure, but also because I want, like Bernadette in Eruditia Ex Memoria, to write down what I learned in school. And I hope your current candidacy renders you a little more receptive to the ridiculous gesture of typing up this 2010 notebook, the first page of which begins on September 7th, 18th Century Aesthetics, GWS 158, present on Dubois in October, book 1, 2, 3, 4, Professor Neil Saccomanno, and goes on about John Locke, whose essay concerning human understanding, if you believe this record, provides the terms in which aesthetics will be worked out but does not himself pose a theory, though he begins the transvaluation of the senses, where the sweet isn't innate, but learned in the womb as good. And the foundation of error is the foundation of knowledge itself. Taste, then, grounds our perception, that general understanding of a common sensorium that underlies our hope there's any reason to be social, which raises the problem of wit/madness regarding language/ideas. Do you, like Locke, want to conduct a critique of authority that starts from the individual subject's ability to obtain knowledge and experience? Do you and I know how to derive autonomy, how to separate out the individual's special existence from what's been passed down, half remembered 14 years after class and mistaken for one's own thought, or the thought of those in the following 100 or 2 years? There's something that doesn't accord with common sense, which is like cash, Locke says, and that we all use it, but it's based on a notion of consensus that we're all forced to assent to, an assent that must still be broken. And yet truth may well become current. The common's not by necessity false. Is grad school still like this? I know you're studying Rousseau, but the sensual version, girly and on his knees, not the one in these notes which return to Locke, who's currently worrying that metaphor's too beautiful. No labor of thought required, pure entertainment. Soon it's clear that nurses are our problem. The parrot is the child, and to understand taste, we must look at children's education. They're taking in goblins in the dark. Their foolish maids tell ghost stories. The youth are corrupted by substitution of others' ideas for their own. It's time for Longinus, or pseudo-Longinus. It's the 1st century, and he's writing a letter on the sublime, which rules. His audience is limited to those who have the natural qualities that enable them to receive the sublime, a contempt for mere survival, and a greatness of character. By what means would you recognize the sublime in yourself? The reader's already at stake, 2,000 years too soon, co-creating the work with the poet-orator by way of her sublime morality. To be capable, you have to be moved by what's great, unmoved by what's not. That's the problem of taste. You like what others like and build a canon by mistake. You think you're assenting when you're being obliterated. Politics, I'm afraid, also matter. It's all this democracy creating the sublime conditions. A speech turns losers into winners retroactively. Pretend you're still Greek. Go ahead, it feels great. The sublime conversion, politically, is to imagine your community to be unvanquished. Are we into this, or do we, like Rousseau, see the incipient totalitarianism? The sublime is sexual assault. You come to see your passivity as agency itself, but not for long, Longinus warns. There's a war on our desires, and it's good. How can we hear Moses repeating the words of God, or the Creator miming him to write in the sublime style, or us participating in the act of creation itself sublimely, taking Boileau's hand as he leads us away from mimesis to performance, and we take on the voices of others? Plato shakes, hypocrite lecteur, according to Longinus, so many ventriloquists, Bataché, arrangé, Taurus tears. Moving takes place against my will again. Form becomes a matter of singularity. Heroic couplets taking their natural shape or offering false wit. Whatever, by putting stress on language as materials, form undoes the common sense that is the basis of great poetry. Not a new thought, but one that occurred to everyone, now said well or truly, to give us back the image of our own mind. It's been 3 weeks of school, late September. I was newly single, smoking each night in a gold robe on the balcony adjacent to my furnished room, forming a bad taste for those who believed most of us should sit silently in Hegel reading group. I developed a taste for reading groups above all else. The class was on to Shaftesbury, for whom moral and aesthetic sentiment must be linked to unity or design. Rational categories have to be brought into play, since they're seen in works of art or nature. A sense of order to which senses respond. An entire providential order guarantees your individual response is designed and comes then into relation with structure. The pre-reflective, again, he knows not what, in this letter concerning enthusiasm, a word that for Locke meant false revelation, what fills the space where reason's absent, whereas noble enthusiasm, if it exists, would offer inspiration, an ecstasy of ideas. Shaftesbury's letter, we're stuck in the epistolary, is to a politician, warning him that enthusiasm could be subversive, and yet there's a divine passion waiting. The sublime is a secularization of vision, and God's here with us to guarantee it. I'm reading now that you meet the anxiety of massacre with massacre. Hobbes says he has to be friends with everyone, and those who fear him are wrong. He fully communicates. He's civil and social, and after all, aesthetics is always about separate minds finding some way to talk to each other. As time goes on, the guys are getting more worried that enthusiasm, even if it's God-given and true and free of false wit and non-consensual experiences of art, might be a diversion from what really matters. Gladiatorial contests were pleasurable after all. We have to admit pleasure and leave moral out of it, since Providence designed us to love this shit, then take our love and mutilate it. I printed the wrong version, so it's a little long. Let's see. I saw Apichatpong recently describe his method of using actors' real memory in his scripts. And though he was not apologizing, he was explaining how Swinton helped him write Memoria. And I'm not going to buy a video camera myself for this project to make a montage of all the food I ate in a week behind myself while I read Gerard Bentley Hopkins' I'm gall, I'm heartburn, God's most deep decree, bitter would have me taste, my taste was me, from I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day, which I first read in a class on Hopkins and Baudelaire, one I dropped in part because when I sat down and whatever wood chair was free, the man to my right suggested we address the elephant in the room. We somehow shared idiomatic animals without my recognizing his face, explaining we both knew that I had scorned his OkCupid messages. But he was willing to start from scratch. He was going to give us a chance to meet without that baggage. The professor arrived with 15 or 20 suck-ups to read this poem aloud, and one student inquired whether anyone in attendance could speak to the 19th century bread leavening agents with which Hopkins would have been familiar. At first, I pitied them until I understood this is the English department's idea of materialism. And it produced a 30-minute argument on the apparent contradiction between self-yeast and sour, whether Hopkins used a Leven starter. I wish you could give me some sense memories to mix in with mine, Bianca, however breadless they'd have to be. And years later at a party, this OkCupid in the yeast story attempted to regale a crowd with an account of his sexual conquests. 4 women in a row, he started, asked me to hit them during sex. These were internet hookups, women about whose taste he had very little information unless they'd chosen long profiles. The first time he was shocked. It hadn't occurred to him girls went for that sort of thing, and one got the impression from the way he told the story, defensive, trying to be the first to laugh at himself, that he'd failed to fulfill the fantasy. But he fared better with the second girl, now seeing the demand as among the usual needs women might have, and he complied. He was enjoying telling the story, everyone uncharacteristically listening to him. He had the smoker's attention. By the 4th woman, he began to feel like a great lover, someone mastering this new era of casual sex. But the 5th girl, here we did a double take as the promised number had grown. I thought, I'm learning what women want, so I went for it before she asked. She screamed, horrified, left from the bed. He lost control of his new audience too, laughing alone now. Dubose says that judgment and taste both refer to a state of one's own sensation or feeling, moving much further in the direction of the autonomy of the aesthetic, beyond even Shaftesbury, I wrote, which does not mean anything to me now, with hope of giving the non-professional reader, the lay audience, the case for their own judgment, a new standard. We have to solicit public consensus, pleasurable and moral. Bianca, when you're riding your bike and the pedal falls off, but being cool, you figure out how to keep going, do you fear at all that you're going to get a taste for the one-pedal life from here on out? What follows tolerance, which converts so easily into active desire? I've chosen the wrong frame. Why borrow Rousseau's title when his purpose was rebuttal and my form's flower? It's not as though you've argued in Lilac's defense and I have to write to you on this Saturday evening when I should be with you in Madison to warn that you've missed the flower's corrupting potential, that Lilac's might be fine in New York City, even Rochester, where the presence of at least one good restaurant suggests its people are already ruined by sensuality, but smaller towns might succumb to the spice of the syringa pubescens, teen lilac, and be carried away in a riot at the floral curfew. Thank you for describing the one that smelled like cardamom, for being on the other end of language, like today, when I crouch, banana in hand, or try toward a seated position on the hardwood floor immediately next to Radio the Cat's breakfast tray, aided by ongoing inability to smell, which prevents any real inhalation of the flaky whitefish's sweat, but forget that my body has imitated its foot stiffness over unmoving time, so my knees resist more vigorously than my beautiful new friend just did, his 2 vials of meds, instead flopping over onto hip, knees beside me, biting the fruit while I scritch behind his ears to encourage his own bites, which works. Radio eats half his bowl in a rush, purring, pushing his spine into my palm, pausing only to say meow on the same ear-piercing register Easy once used, when I'd hold her in my lap to share the morning's labna, I think, finishing my Cavendish, tasteless without my sensing the isomal acetate it secretes to attract bees. And I remember many loves whom I ate near in hopes my eagerness would offer crutch to their dampened hunger. On all fours with a bowl of Cheez-Its, my own kibble, cat side-eyeing me, a little mocking, but still moving toward her bowl and chomping toothlessly, tears in all four eyes. I've always had a taste for cats. A friend who told me that my stone third dinner promoted her recovery after moving in to avoid college students' sentences about food, the kind that make eating hard, which I'll omit because I want you to feast with me too, as a friend, one we've both kissed, did one night when will we, won't we, briefly resolving itself in the direction of will, he and I pulled away to answer one of our phones to find another friend, newly heartbroken, blocks near. Have you eaten today? We asked, and came together to buy her steak free and agree, instead of going home together this one time, to eat together for the rest of our lives, to even consider living longer than we'd had originally planned, life now being worth living, so that friendship could be longer too, to be so good even at being friends that we'd become more lovable to everyone else, that we'd move through the world sharing at least 2,000 meals, maybe 5, with others coming and going from the same long table, petting anyone who needed the encouragement to stomach their galette, or their anchovy potatoes, or their cuddy, or their blue wilderness adult dry cat food, the kibble that gave Rosie UTIs, adding a curry or bailiff, one of us carrying lentils to a friend on the art of the sea and the other running to the bodega for curative avocado and saltines for another, until we would, I hoped then, become famous for feeding the world's best talkers, the kindest animals who, when we say, "Do you know how much I love you?" say, "Yeah, you've made it pretty clear," or, "Meow." What's up, radio? Meow. Are you in communication with the ghost of the three-legged love of my life, ever hungry, to whom I fed a different flavor each day to help her unlock taste from pain? Meow. You just came inside. Meow. You could come sit beside me while I write. Meow. Okay, I'll brush you while you eat. Meow. And again, with each pass of the wire teeth over his half-tail, he ate a bite, since food tastes best when we know that love still exists in the world, that everyone has lunch, that taste even matters less than holding on to faith that someone wants us to eat, even those who have moved on or out. Of all the senses, I've struggled the most with taste, to be literal. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Rainer. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you both for putting your brilliant minds in conversation. Thank you all for coming. I also want to, and Kay for your beautiful introduction. Thank you, James. Thank you, Serene. And thank you also to all volunteers. And we hope to see you soon at the Poetry Project. Thank you.